the way home. You need to charge your phone. You need to carry a portable battery. You need to attach your GPS unit to the car before you leave. You need to do any number of things so that you don't get lost on the rural roads outside the city, wondering where you're supposed to go in order to get back home, even if you're just going for a drive to clear your head. Especially if you're just going for a drive to clear your head. In my mind, I went through all the nagging I had heard from my parents and tried to compose what I was going to tell them when I got back home after curfew. My phone was at 1%, so I debated whether I should message them. But what if I had to call 911? I felt like I had done everything wrong, and now here I was, on a dark rural road, in the middle of nowhere. Except for... what are those lights in the distance? It looked like a car. I waved them over. The driver was an older man, wearing a black leather jacket, who seemed more than willing to help me find the city. A little too eager, though. The driver insisted that he'd lead me all the way home. I insisted that I just needed some directions, but he told me to get in my car and drive behind him. He told me he was familiar with the city, these roads, and he liked helping people find their way back. I walked back to my car, just noticing now the thick fog that was descending. Driving was intimidating, but the older man in front of me had his high beams on, making it easy for me to follow him. Although, it was taking a long time, and I didn't recognize any of the roads. The longer the drive went on, the more I feared he was taking me on some wild goose chase. Best case scenario, he was taking me to the wrong city. Worst case scenario, he was... I refused to finish that thought. Finally, we arrived at the city. I tried to flag him down so he could pull over and I could tell him I was okay to find my way home. He wasn't looking at me, though. He let me pass him, and I tried to turn so I could lose him. By the time I got home and parked on the street, I hoped I wouldn't see him again. Though I wasn't entirely confident I had lost him. As quickly as I could, I turned off my engine, locked the door, ran up to my steps and into my house, where I gave my parents a big hug. Of course, they were worried sick about me, what with being an hour late for dinner and all. I told them what had happened, but lying that the old man was nothing more than a kind stranger who had helped me find my way back. My parents applauded him for being such a good Samaritan. I didn't mention the bad feeling I got when I thought back to the man, and the way he insisted on driving me all the way home. We sat down for dinner, and I was ready to eat something. Not because I was hungry, but because I wanted something to do, and company to take my mind off the ride back. The three of us sat at the dinner table. I think my parents noticed I was quiet. They must have thought I was just embarrassed. I looked up, just out the window, to see a car driving by, which looked surprisingly similar to the one the man had been driving from earlier. The car went down the street, and I thought to myself, you need to calm down. 5 minutes later, the same car went down our street again. This time, though, it stopped in front of my house, and the driver stepped out. Even though he was on the other side of the street, I knew it was the old man who had helped me, and he was examining the car I had been driving. It was so foolish of me to park out on the street. Why hadn't I taken the time to go to the garage with it? I put my head down on the table, worried he would look through the window and see my face through the window. In the corner of my eye, I saw the way his head turned to the house. Was he gonna come knock on the door? Nothing. When I looked up a few minutes later, the car was gone, along with the old man. My mother scolded me for putting my head down at the table, but in response, I just excused myself from the table. It was time for bed, as I must have been seeing things. I closed the curtains before falling into a restless sleep. In my dream, the man was coming to find me in that foggy rural area. He was coming for me, and something was shaking me. I was woken up by my father with one of his hands on my shoulder and the other over my mouth. My heart immediately started to beat faster, and when I turned to see my mother opening the curtains, outside the window, the old man's car was parked right next to mine. As quickly as she could, my mother opened the window and the three of us crawled down. We were on the roof, window closed behind us. I could hear alarms and sirens in the distance. We stayed as quietly as we could on that little portion of the roof, just outside the window. Inside my room, the old man moved furniture, lifted my things, and dragged what sounded like a knife along the wall. He was looking for me, and he called, "Boy, where are you? I want to help you get home." On the street, the police arrived. The old man was taken away and put into jail. It was pure luck that we escaped. Apparently, he had gone to 4 families before us and killed them too. At his trial, the man confessed to 7, but couldn't tell anyone where those bodies were or what their names were. All of them were young men like me, who had gotten lost on these roads and needed help getting home. For the longest time, I wasn't able to drive a car. When I started to, I never drove after dark, and never in a rural area. As much as possible, I tried not to think about the incident. The sense of fear, or the sense of making all the wrong decisions, and ultimately needing help from a madman to get home. More than anything else, though, I tried not to think of that large knife that was put into evidence, and how it was pure luck that it wasn't plunged into my chest. Some days, forgetting was a successful endeavor. But today, of all days, I distinctly remembered what happened. It was all quite vivid, almost like I was experiencing it again. Here I was, 20 years later, and even though the old man had no way of knowing where I lived, there was still a fear he'd come to find me as soon as he got out of jail later today. One thing he claimed over and over at his trial: he always helped young men find their way home. And he hadn't failed yet.